Another video about Bon Scott writing or not writing Back in Black? What's going on? Why did I make another really long video on this topic? Well, you're about to find out. Eddie Canestracci here. Yes, I'm back in black. Yeah, I had to go there. Representing both the Bon era and the Brian era. Yeah, that's right, because everyone that knows me knows how much I love AC/DC. They're my favorite band, and they have been since I was, 11 years old. Yes, since I was 11 years old, a little wee lad that first saw Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive. Yeah, that's actually how I got into AC/DC. I was a little kid watching Maximum Overdrive. I had the VHS, I got it from a Blockbuster or whatever. And it blew me away. All this great music blew me away. You know all about that if you've been following my channel for years. Who might not know that, who obviously didn't know that, was Jesse Fink. Yeah, Jesse Fink, the author of Bon, The Last Highway. Yes, I reviewed, it was a review, that's what I do. I'm a review site. I review albums, sometimes a movie here and there, but usually it's the bands I love and my favorite albums and what have you. But I did something a little different with my last video because I noticed that this has been a trend that's been kind of emerging amongst a certain fraction of the AC/DC fan base. Not a large fraction, but it's a growing fraction. I've seen this more and more in recent years. These people that believe the conspiracy theory that Bon Scott wrote some of the lyrics on Back in Black, or even the majority of the lyrics on Back in Black, even though he was not credited. Brian Johnson, along with Malcolm and Angus Young, is the credited songwriter for those songs. And Jesse Fink's book, I would assume it's his best-selling book. It's done very well. He also wrote another book before that, which I didn't mention in my last video, The Youngs. The Youngs is a very good biography, and I found it very illuminating about Angus and Malcolm Young and Bon Scott and the whole songwriting process of AC/DC. It's a fascinating read, and I recommend it. I still recommend it. In fact, I also still recommend Bon, The Last Highway, even though I think Jesse thinks I was a little too hard on the book. He didn't like a lot of the things I had to say about it. More on that in a second. But I still recommended it to people. Twice in my video, I told people, even though I was not sold on the Bon Scott theory, for the most part, I still thought the biographical sections involving Bon Scott and Silversmith and some of the stuff going on in his final days, I thought it was all very fascinating as a huge fan of Bon Scott. And I thought it was one of the better biographies, even though I felt the second half leaned too much into the conspiracy theory about Back in Black and Bon writing the lyrics, and I didn't really buy it. And I went into detail on why I didn't buy it, and I hit a lot of the big theories I discussed and broke down in that last video. And I really got into Silversmith and Holly X's testimony, their oral testimony, as Jesse Fink would put it. I guess you can say I was somewhat hard on it. Yes, it was my opinion. That's all I am, just guy on YouTube giving opinions, just like a lot of people in Jesse's book. Just a lot of people giving opinions. No evidence, no proof. They think this, or they heard that. I said a lot of it was hearsay. He didn't like that. More on that later. I will discuss the definition of hearsay a little bit later in this video. And he didn't like a lot of the stuff. So he didn't like a lot of things I said. I used the word bullshit a lot, and he did not like that. So Jesse, I'm just telling you right now, if you're watching this video, and I'm sure you are, I'm going to try not to say bullshit too much, all right? I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy that's just trying to push another guy's buttons. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to push your buttons. So I'm not going to say bullshit that much. I can't promise it might not come out occasionally when diving even deeper into the oral testimony in your book, which I'm going to do. So essentially what happened is, after this video, I think it was 2 days after I uploaded it. It was quick. I had a suspicion that Jesse Fink would eventually fall under his radar, But I didn't think it was going to be that quick. It was within 2 days, boom. I guess the YouTube algorithm was like, hey, you look up on Scott shit, here you go. Edwin's video. Good job, YouTube algorithm. You're getting my shit out to the right people, because I do think Jesse Fink likes some AC/DC. So that's good. So it's good that it got it out to him. You know, he's the kind of viewership I'm looking for. So good job, YouTube. Jesse posted a comment. I printed out. I got a lot of material here. Took screenshots and I printed out all of our exchange. This, believe it or not, this is all just YouTube comment exchanges between me and him. Yeah. Well, you know, we're both writers, so yeah. Yeah, that's what I do for a living. Yeah, you see, that's another thing. I don't think Jesse realized. I think he thought it was just like some, I don't know, some clown on YouTube. This is just something I do for fun. It's non-profit. That's the thing. I'm not profiting by any of this. I do this as a hobby. It's what I do to blow off steam at the end of a workday. What I do for a living is I'm a screenwriter and I write articles on the craft of screenwriting. And that is what I do for a living. This is just a passion project of mine, creating these YouTube videos. So I'm that kind of guy. I'm a guy that will really dig into things and get really in depth about things. I thought that was fairly obvious from the last video. But according to Jesse, he thought I was not taking it very serious. He didn't think what I had to say was very substantial. And that hurt me. That really hurt me. So I was like, you know, I should really dig into this more. You know, Jesse's right. Jesse's right. And, you know, this is the thing. There's a writer's strike going on right now. So I have a lot of time on my hands. More time than I normally would have. So what I did was, see there? Look, Jesse. I bought another copy of your book. Yeah, I put some money in your wallet. You can thank me in the comment section if you want. $25 too. It wasn't cheap. $25, and it's soft. It's not even a hardcover book for $25. What can I say? That's the world nowadays. But it's cool. I like the gold font. I like that. It was an updated edition. It's the latest updated edition. And once again, I recommend it. Yeah, I recommend buying Jesse's updated edition of The Last Highway. I think it's even better than the last one. There are 2 conspiracy theories in this book, and one I think is stronger than the other one. I'm not going to get into it because I like to focus on music in my videos, but the other conspiracy theory, essentially, it's a theory that Jesse has that Bond was perhaps doing more than just over drinking the night that he died. Maybe he was mixing it with a stronger drug. I found a lot of that evidence more compelling and more substantial than the other conspiracy involving the Back in Black lyrics. And in fact, I think they kind of contradict each other. I think the stronger conspiracy discredits the lesser conspiracy, and I will get more into that later. But I read the whole book. Like I said, writer's strike, so I got a lot of time on my hand. So I read this whole goddamn book again. That's what I've been doing all week. So I got that. That's research material right there. All the things Jesse brought to my attention that I will address in this video. I printed up Angus Young's Kerrang quote, which I'm going to get into. Oh yeah, and there's all this. I got a lot of notes. Got a timeline of what was going on with Bon Scott in 1979, a timeline which I think makes it clear that he couldn't have written much, if any, of the Back in Black lyrics. This is what's ironic, if you like a little irony, people. In my last video, even though Jesse hated it, I wasn't totally discrediting the Bon Scott wrote Back in Black theory. In fact, I said, largely based on Angus Young's quotes, I said that I thought there was a strong possibility that he wrote a few lines. Not enough that I thought he deserved a songwriting credit, but I thought he probably did contribute a few of the most memorable lines. And of course, the song title, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, which Brian Johnson and the band has always cited as a title that came from Bon Scott. That was my final verdict at the end of the video. It was a pretty fair and balanced, and I felt moderate view of the theory, and most of the comments said that. The irony is, after reading all of Jesse's comments and hearing what he had to say directly to me, and after rereading his book and really diving into it and thinking about things and reading all the quotes out there, I came to the conclusion that no, I have a new conclusion now. I don't think Bon Scott wrote one lyric or one line on Back in Black. In fact, I think it's only that one title, which Brian and the band has always cited. He wrote Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. Although he didn't write that song, just that title came from him. It was something he had said. And I don't think he wrote anything else. Even the most Bon Scott-esque line, she told me to come, but I was already there, I think Brian Johnson wrote. And I'm going to spend a really long time now. So get a drink, sit down, relax. I'm going to go through Jesse's book. I'm going to go through various quotes I didn't discuss in the last video. I'm going to dive even deeper into this whole conspiracy. And I'm going to make my case. Okay, we're going to get into this. And this This is how seriously I'm going to be taking this. Because again, Jesse said I wasn't taking it seriously enough. So I'm going to take this so seriously that I'm going to wear glasses. Yes, I'm going to wear glasses. This is actually what I look like when I'm writing, when I'm making a living with my words, just like Jesse Fink does. This is what I do. See, he didn't know that. See, unfortunately, he probably didn't realize I was smart. Yeah, you see glasses? I'm a smart guy. Whoa, he's in trouble now. Glasses. So Jesse, he thinks I'm misrepresenting this book that I keep plugging for him. That's the first thing he said to me. He said, you misrepresent what I wrote in regard to Holly's claim regarding chartreuse. So I was a little confused because I hadn't read the book in a while. So I actually apologized to him. I said it had been years since I read the book, so apologies. I forgot the chartreuse eyes bit came directly from you and not Holly, because that's what I thought he was implying. He later on said, no, it did come from Holly. So I don't really understand what he was getting at in the beginning. And then when I actually read this book, On the Last Highway by Jesse Fink, when I was reading this, apparently I have a good memory. But yeah, she was the one that made up these imaginary lyrics about her eye color. And this is regarding You Shook Me All Night Long, which she believes Bon Scott wrote about her. And of course, he's not the credited songwriter. Brian Johnson and the Young Brothers are. So Hollyak said, I have one last thing to say about that song. The lyric is chartreuse eyes, not sightless eyes. Okay, her quote. Her suggestion. If you want to leave a comment, Jesse, explain what you meant when you said I was misrepresenting your book. Seems like I was right on the money with how I was representing it and her claims. So the made up lyrics. She made up lyrics. Those are not the lyrics of You Shook Me All Night Long. Okay, let's talk about the horse, which she sold in 1979 apparently because she just couldn't spend the time with it because she was too busy dating a bunch of rock stars. The horse named Double Time. Yeah, Jesse uses this as a big piece of evidence. Like, oh my God, she had a horse. She says she sold the horse in 79 because she was too busy dating rock stars. So this is the thing about Double Time. Double Time, she's got one picture. There's like one picture that Jesse shows of her on a horse. It's not like she's outside a stable that has its name, Double Time. There's no proof that this horse's name is Double Time. It's just a pretty blonde girl on a horse. That horse could have any name. I mean, she's just claiming it. That's not proof. That's just her saying, just like chartreuse eyes, she's just saying something like it's Double Time because that reflects a line in You Shook Me All Night Long, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But she's just saying it's Double Time and Jesse's just taking her word for it. Like, yes, of course, wow. The horse's name could have been Double Vision, could have inspired a Foreigner song. That lines up with this time period. Late 70s, dating a lot of rock stars. No doubt Foreigner could have been in the mix. Yeah, that horse's name could have been Double Vision. We don't know. It could have had any name. We don't know. We don't have any proof. But what we do have proof of is that the lyrics themselves do not indicate at all whoever is writing the lyrics is referring to a horse. The line from You Shook Me All Night Long, written by Young and Johnson, working double time on the seduction line. That's the lyric. That's the lyric that he thinks is the gotcha, Brian. Obviously, this is not about horse. In the same way that Back in Black is obviously not about Bon Scott's bank account. So working double time on the seduction line. Okay, let me explain the sexual innuendo here. Okay, because maybe Jesse Fink, though he's a Bon Scott expert, doesn't seem to get sexual innuendos. Okay, so what that means is essentially, it's not even really innuendo. It's kind of just coming out and saying it. He is shagging a lady and, like this whole song's about, like she's really giving it back to him. She's shaking his world up, She's really frisky and she's really giving it back to him and he's got to work double time to keep up with her. That's what that's about. The whole song, it's just, it's a simple song. It's about screwing your brains out. That's what the song's about. There's no chartreuse eyes. There's no horses. It's just about knocking boots. And like Bond, Brian had sex with women before, so he knew a few things about it. Also, another interesting thing is during this time period, the time period in question this is when the band was in Miami in the studio. They were involved in some initial recording sessions for what would become the Highway to Hell album with producer/engineer Eddie Kramer of Kiss fame, and also was an engineer on Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix albums. And he's a legendary guy, Eddie Kramer. But he didn't click with AC/DC, and you can hear from the the Bonfire box set, you can hear, yeah, the material's not that strong. I mean, there's some good shit there, but it's not on the level of what these songs would end up being with Mutt Lange. I talked about this in the last video. These are early versions of several Highway to Hell songs that have different lyrics, entirely different lyrics, in some cases different song titles. Touch Too Much is like an entirely different song, even musically. Beating Around the Bush is called Backseat Confidential, and not nearly as strong as the lyrics that we would hear later after they started working with Mutt Lange. More on that later. And according to Eddie Kramer, Bon was struggling with the lyrics at this point. And when you actually listen, there's actual evidence, actual audio evidence, you could kind of hear that, yeah, Bon is not like bringing his best stuff to the material. Well, it sounds like he's getting drunk and he's fucking around a lot with a certain lady that loves horses. So Bon's not bringing it like he did on Powerage, which is amazing and I think his best lyrics ever and my favorite AC/DC album of all time. But he's a little spent and he's not bringing his best stuff and the band is not clicking with Eddie Kramer. Eddie Kramer is not bringing out what he needs to bring out in Bon Scott. So during this time period, however, according to Holly X, Bon Scott is walking around the house and singing You Shook Me All Night Long. She says, like, verbatim, the whole song, the melody, the chorus, he's singing, according to her. Like, why wouldn't he give it to the band? Like, right then and there. This is also when AC/DC is trying to break into America. This is why they're going with a different producer than Harry Vonda and George Young, which produced all their Aussie albums. They're trying to have that big hit. They're trying to break through. That's their mission right now. And you're telling me Bon Scott wrote You Shook Me All Night Long all by himself, which is not the way AC/DC wrote songs. Usually Angus and Malcolm always came up the riffs first and sometimes the title and then gave it to Bon. But whatever. According to Holly X, Bon's walking around singing a fully formed You Shook Me All Night Long, which is all about her, while he's in the studio and struggling, in the band struggling with lyrics and to have a hit song. And doesn't give it to them. Or he sings it to them and they pass on it for some reason. I don't know. It's also odd because I always thought Get It Hot from Highway to Hell sounded kind of like a prototype for You Shook Me All Night Long. Like, I personally thought that should have been a single. I think that would have done well in the States. It's almost as if, like, in an evolutionary state that the band was, like, working their way to eventually getting to their biggest hit. Like, regardless of who was writing the verses, the Young Brothers were going to get to a song like You Shook Me All Night Long on their next album. And if Bon did have all those lyrics, worked out back then, like, why wasn't Get It Hot? Why didn't that become You Shook Me All Night Long? Doesn't make sense to me. Then we got Robin, the Miami ICU nurse, who was best friends with Holly X and sleeping with Cliff Williams. She weighed in. And of course, she's friends with Holly. She has her back. Anyway, Robin claims that Bon ran around shouting, "This girl shook my world." That sounds kind of stupid. I'm not the only person to use the word stupid when referring to this overall theory, by the way. We'll get to that. Of course, knowledgeable music fans will know that there's nothing original about the phrase, "You shook me all night long." Muddy Waters' "You Shook Me," lyrics penned by the great Willie Dixon, was obviously the inspiration. The Young Brothers were huge Muddy Waters fans and blues fans in general, and they surely knew this song. Also, this blues classic was also covered by Led Zeppelin and the Jeff Beck Group, which were also big influences on the Young Brothers. So there's no way they didn't know this song. Let me read you the first verse and main vocal hook of this classic Muddy Waters Willie Dixon song. "You know you shook me. You shook me all night long. You know you shook me, baby. You shook me all night long." So when Brian revealed that the Young Brothers already had the title and chorus of You Shook Me All Night Long, which is something he said many times, it makes sense that the Young Brothers simply drew inspiration from this classic blues standard. So they got the lyrics. They got the lyrics from this old Willie Dixon pen song. Plus the melody. Yeah, it's a strong melody, the way people are singing it. It's a little Bon Scott-esque. Or maybe Bon Scott was always AC/DC-esque. More on that later. The Young Brothers, without Bon Scott, wrote such catchy pop melodies as "Can I Sit Next to You, Girl" and "Money Talks." You're telling me that these guys can't write a catchy melody on their own? Mentored by George Young of Easy Beats fame? It's one of the many key factors of the band's success after Bon's death. To me, it's a pretty simple formula. Willie Dixon lyrics plus catchy Young Brothers melody equals hit song. And then there's the line, the oft-cited line from You Shook Me All Night Long. "She told me to come, but I was already there." Even me, even this guy, Edwin Canestracci, in his last video said, "I think that's probably from Bon. I feel like that was one of the lines they probably took from Bon." I don't think that anymore. I believe Brian Johnson's claim that he wrote that specific line, which was provided to me by Jesse Fink of all people. Well, thank you, Jesse Fink. It was in a footnote, but hey, I read it. And I believe it. More in the footnotes later. It also happens to be like the most memorable line in the song, so it's the line that people are going to grab if they're trying to grab a line from an AC/DC song. It's also very similar to a line from the biggest hit from the subsequent album, Let's Get It Up. There's the line, the moon is rising, and so am I. Okay, you see, a cheeky double entendre. Pardon my French. You know, double entendres aren't rocket science. It's not impossible for a group of professional and extremely talented musicians to figure out how to emulate Bond's writing style. I went into that in detail in the last video. But yeah, it's possible that Brian Johnson, the Young Brothers, Mutt Lange, and apparently Tony Platt even, all working together could come up with a few double entendres of their own. I don't know. I mean, I guess She Told Me to Come, but I Was Already There is a little bit more clever than The Moon is Rising and So Am I. But to me, they sound like the same guy writing it. Sounds like the same kind of line to me. But most of these people that cite that this line came from Bon Scott, one never even listened to Back in Black or any of their later albums. So they probably don't even know about that other line. And I'm talking about Silver Smith. Yeah, Silver Smith, who never listened to Back in Black. Even though she was like his main muse for Powerage, like legit. Unlike like Holly X, who I don't know. She's just some chick he might have shagged. I don't know. I'm not saying that it's not true what she says. I'm just saying I don't know. I don't have proof. I do have proof that Silver Smith, there are pictures right there. There's a picture. There is proof that Silver Smith was a very important person in Bon Scott's life. Interestingly enough, like she inspired songs like Gone Shootin' and stuff throughout Powerage, and perhaps even some songs, I'm sure, on Highway to Hell. I mean, she was the woman he was most crazy about after his wife, Irene. It just seems odd that if Silver Smith is so certain that Bon wrote all Back in Black, you know, even though she never heard it and she only talked to him one time on the phone during the 1 week he had to write the whole album. More on that later, that timeline. She wasn't curious to listen to the album. I don't know. I just think that's odd. I know they use the excuse, some of these people, that, oh, I was too heartbroken or too upset to listen to it. I don't know. I'd be curious. I'm just saying. Even if it was years later, like after the initial pain, you know, like maybe 5 years later, like you think you'd be like, okay, let me listen to this album that the band put out like a few months after Bon died. And especially since I think he wrote it all. You know, I think my ex-lover wrote this album. I think she'd listen to it. But no, but of course she does know a few of the hits. Like everyone in this book, they know the hits. More on that later. She cites that the line, of course the most famous line from their most famous song, She Told Me to Come But I Was Already There, was in one of Bon's letters. He was a letter writer. He liked to write letters a lot. Back in 1976, okay? Remember that date, 1976. But according to rock journalist Malcolm Dome, yeah, Malcolm Dome, some of you might know that guy, Dome claims to have seen the same line in Bon's notebook. Yes, the single notebook theory is all coming together. Okay, so he saw it in the notebook, and it was just a couple days prior to Bon's death. This would be February of 1980. We're going to get a little more into the timeline later, but essentially, Bon Scott, on his last night that he was alive, went to a venue in Camden called The Music Machine. He either went just the night he died or possibly 2 nights before he died as well. It's possible. Like, if you like the venue, yeah, maybe he went twice. You know, he was partying and drinking a lot during that week, so it's possible. According to Malcolm Dome, this is what he says. It's hard to be accurate from a distance of a quarter of a century and through the haze of alcohol which enveloped the night. Okay, so there, he was heavily drinking. But one line sticks as being one of those sheets. Bon Scott showed him some sheets, he says. He used the word sheets. She told me to come, but I was already there. Whoa! When interviewed by Mick Wall, Malcolm Dome said the following. Shortly before he died, Bon showed me his book of lyrics that he kept in a file. So Bon Scott's carrying a file around him. He was showing me some ideas he'd been working on for Back in Black. Not the song Back in Black. Oh, sorry, Jesse. He just blew your Back in the Black theory. He just said, Michael Dome, that he did not see the song Back in Black. Not the song Back in Black, but songs that were for the next album. There were a couple of lines like, She told me to come, but I was already there. The only line he ever says that he remembers seeing. The most famous line from their most famous song. Which ended up in, You Shook Me All Night Long. That's a Bon lyric. And I saw it. I saw it written down. First he says it's a file, sheets in a file, like a folder, I guess. Is that what he means? And here's another thing. This is just a kind of like just common sense, or at least judging by my habits as a writer. That's his work. That's what he's doing during the day. He's finished work. He wants to go off and blow off some steam. So he's finished work for the day. So what's he going to do? Going to go to a music venue, a rock and roll music venue with a bunch of drunk geezers. And he's going to be showing them all, a music journalist at that, a drunken music journalist with a big mouth. He's going to show him the lyrics he's working on for the next AC/DC album. Okay, so Bon is just showing people, hey, look at these lyrics I'm writing. All right, you believe that? All right, so he's walking around showing people these lyrics, or maybe just Malcolm Dome. And that's one of the more damning pieces of evidence. So there you go. Also, I would go back to the timeline here. Okay, so this is the same line, which according to Michael Dome is like some freshly scribbled new lyric that he came up with in 1980, in February 1980. This is the same line Silver Smith claims to see in a letter back in 1976. Apparently, when the Young brothers and Brian Johnson contradict each other in interviews, that's like, indication that there's something afoot. But when it's people bolstering the narrative that Fink is trying to sell, then it's all right that they contradict each other, and by several years. Interestingly enough, Tony Platt, who was the engineer for Back in Black, he was actually there for the entire recording and a lot of the writing of the album. Tony Platt had a different story, and in fact, his story backs up the official story that Brian Johnson wrote the majority of the lyrics for Back in Black. And he was the guy there. He was like actually there recording the album. What's interesting is I didn't even notice. I didn't read it the first time around. Because you know why I missed it the first time around? Look at this book. Look at all these quotes from all these people. There's a section where there's just some old punk rocker just talking about how he thinks AC/DC sucked after Back in Black. Like just a music opinion. Like it's a page that's a music opinion. But Tony Platt, the very well-respected and very successful music engineer who engineered Highway to Hell and Back in Black, he was interviewed by Jesse Fink. I was like, shit, Jesse Fink interviewed Tony Platt, and he said all this stuff. It's like a whole page of stuff, and it's a footnote. Yeah, it's a footnote. I was like, why is this a footnote? So, I started reading it. This is regarding the line double time on the seduction line, which Tony Platt actually says he came up with. So, someone who was actually in the studio with the band when they were writing and recording the album says that line was not about a horse and had nothing to do with Holly X or Bon Scott. Interesting. So anyway, this is about that line, which he says that they were all essentially working together. It was like a 15-minute kind of frenzied, inspired jam session where everyone, Brian, the Young brothers, and Tony Platt, and maybe Mutt Lange too, were all working together to kind of pull out the best lyrics from Brian. Brian himself detailed something very similar with the writing of Hell's Bells, how Mutt Lange kind of acted like a director and kind of helped him and coached him and got the lyrics out of him in explicit detail, which definitely had the ring of truth. And this likewise has the ring of truth. Tony Platt, engineer of Back in Black. The context of this is very important. We were doing vocals at Compass Point Studios, and Brian needed to pull the lyrics together for the songs. It is not unusual for lyric discussion to take place during a vocal session, and everyone was involved. The key factor was interesting plays on words, and I just happened to come up with that one, and it stuck. There was no formal collaboration. It doesn't work like that. I contributed to the lyric in the same way as I contributed to the sound. They played, I tweaked. I think you have to get away from the concept that the sessions were especially choreographed. A great deal had to be spontaneous, and perhaps that contributed to the spark the album had. And then Jesse Fink asks him, so you came up with the working double time on the seduction line completely from scratch, or AC/DC were already playing around with the words double time? Todd Platt, I'm afraid I can't really remember. It's a long time ago. Brian certainly had the bulk of the lyrics written. Okay, did you hear that? Brian certainly had the bulk of the lyrics written, and he probably did that quite quickly. It's a great riff melody to work with. No shit. One of the greatest ever. And they already had the chorus, remember, which was inspired by a Muddy Water / Willie Dixon song. So there you go. So that's Tony Platt, engineer of Back in Black. Now, remember in my last video, if you watched it, I talked about my theory, because a lot of people are like, how could Brian Johnson write lyrics this great when he never wrote lyrics like this before? More on that later. And I I theorized that they were all working together like a team. It was like all hands on deck. Brian did the majority, but you had help. You had people coaching him. They were acting as soundboards. There was riffing. They were trying to record the album of their career that would save their career. They were all working hard. You have to ask yourself, and this is just a question. I'm just raising a question. I'm not making any accusations. Just doing what Jesse's doing. Jesse's just raising questions. He's not making accusations. He said it himself. He told me he's not saying anyone's a liar, and he said it in his book. He's perhaps heavily suggesting it, but in legal terms, he is not stating it or saying it. He's not making that claim. And likewise, I'm not making a claim like that against Jesse Fink. I'm just raising a question. I think it's a very good question to ask why an old punk rocker in Miami that claimed to party a bit, Bon Scott, gets a whole page in the proper book, like a proper chapter in the book. He gets a whole page just going off about how he thinks Fly on a Wall sucks or whatever. And Tony Platt, the engineer of Back in Black, gives a detailed breakdown of the creative process of writing the lyrics of the songs on the album that is in question. And that gets regulated to a footnote tucked in the back of the book. Very interesting. That's all. Why? Maybe it was a mistake by the editor. I don't know. Something to look into, Jesse, because I think a lot of people would be very interested to know what the engineer of Back in Black had to say on the matter, more so than this some old punk rocker who had basically had fuck all to do with the band. Just my opinion, and just questions I'm asking. Oh, and that's another thing. The Cliff and Phil factor. Sometimes we forget about them. Yeah, too bad, because they're one of the greatest rhythm sections ever. Jesse Fink definitely forgets about them a lot. He didn't forget about them in the Youngs when he talked about how Cliff Williams and Bon Scott really bonded because they were like the two older guys in the band. And it's interesting because essentially this happened again with Brian Johnson. He really buddied up with Brian Johnson because like Bon Scott, they were closer in age than the younger Bond brothers. So Cliff Williams was very tight with Bond. In fact, he was down there in Miami partying with all those girlfriends. They were good mates, the two of them. And Phil, come on, everyone knows Phil Rudd was fucking nobody's yes man. According to rumor, yeah, it's a rumor, but he was actually fired from the band. So there's some circumstantial evidence that he had a major disagreement with Malcolm Young during the recording of Flick of the Switch. But that's 3 years later. Come on, everyone knows, look at Phil Rudd and the kind of shit he gets up to. He's no one's fucking yes man. So you're telling me Cliff Williams, Bond's buddy, and Phil Rudd that also was pretty tight with Bon Scott, going back to the very early days in the band together, you're telling me that they were fine, they'd be fine with the young brothers stealing lyrics from Bon Scott and giving them to this new guy they just started working with? You're also telling me that Mutt Lange and Tony Platt, a highly sought-after producer and engineer, both responsible for numerous hit records by big bands during this period. The Cars, Heartbeat City, Foreigners 4, all those smash hit Def Leppard albums, which Mutt Lange co-wrote a lot of the biggest hits on. More on that later. You're telling me these two guys were also involved in this whole cover-up, this whole conspiracy. So you're saying that Tony Platt is a liar. You're not saying it, but you're implying it or raising the question. So Cliff Williams, Phil Rudd, Mutt Lange, and Tony Platt are all lying. All right, and they're part of the conspiracy. These consummate professionals are lying, but the ex-groupies, ex-drug addicts, and ex-managers are the ones telling the truth. But again, just a question I'm raising. I would like to hear what Jesse thinks about that. The comments, by the way, Jesse, are good for my algorithm. So you were actually helping my video get more views. So thank you for all this research. All this great research you provided for me. I appreciate it. And thank you for helping me with my YouTube algorithm. You're a top bloke. Fink also interviewed Phil Carlson, the London-based vice president of Atlantic Records during the time period in question. Carlson said the following about Brian Johnson in Back in Black. He wrote all the lyrics to Back in Black. It's fucking stupid to say anything else. Unless someone can prove otherwise, it's inflammatory and I think stupid. Yes, because I know Brian is a very good lyric writer. Why would he need Bon Scott lyrics? Bon Scott was a very interesting and cheeky lyric writer, too. A bit of tongue-in-cheek. I think it's stupid to continue the conspiracy. Brian wrote the lyrics. It's absolutely what happened. My personal takeaway is that guy sounds kind of like a off-the-cuff, no-bullshit guy. He's just telling Jesse Fink what he thinks in a straight-up way. But who I think is less straight up is someone who Jesse Fink puts a lot more stock into. David Krebs. And we had an exchange about this in the comments section. So David Krebs, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Krebs, he was a partner in this giant management company. They were probably the biggest hard rock management company in the world. They also managed Aerosmith as well. It was a big firm. Now, he was not AC/DC's day-to-day guy. That was Peter Mintz. As someone who myself has been repped by a lot of big agencies, actually one of them was one of the agencies that reps AC/DC. Yeah, true story. Anyway, I've gone through, in 15 years of working in the entertainment industry, I've gone through 5 managers and 3 agents. Okay, a lot of musical chairs. Listen, nothing against managers, but I'm just saying, from my experience, they don't like it when you fire them. Yeah, it doesn't matter how rich they are. They're all rich. These are all a bunch of rich people. Jesse Fink kind of made the claim in one of his comments to me, he made all that money off of AC/DC because, he got money from Back in Black. He repped them while they had their biggest hits. They helped make him rich, so why would he say negative things about them? Well, like I said, managers don't like to be fired. And the thing is, they eventually parted ways with AC/DC. I don't know exactly who left who. Obviously, AC/DC left them, because why would they leave AC/DC? I can't find that information. I asked Jesse Fink about it. He wouldn't tell me. Maybe he doesn't know. I don't know why he didn't ask him. Maybe he did and he didn't put it in the book. Why wouldn't you ask him, well, why aren't you AC/DC's manager anymore? Jesse Fink also mentioned something that I don't know if it was off the record or not, but he told me in a public comment on my YouTube channel, which is a public space as far as I'm concerned, so it's fair game. But anyway, he told me that David Krebs told him that he helped Steven Tyler kick heroin. Okay, in the mid-'80s, I guess, he thinks that. Even though a couple years later, Steven Tyler and Aerosmith broke away from that management company. Aerosmith claimed that his management company was stealing from Aerosmith. Okay, this same guy, when he talks to Jesse Fink, this is what he says about Back in Black and its authorship. I was really amazed because when I read The Youngs, I went and looked up the AC/DC discography, and yeah, Back in Black is written by the brothers and Brian Johnson. I don't believe that. Okay, I know Jesse doesn't like this word, but here's another quote that was put in the back of the book. Another footnote from Malcolm Young, the man himself, in an interview with Phil Wilding of Classic Rock in 2000. Again, relegated to a footnote. Malcolm Young. The only thing Ian Jeffrey ever gave me was a note with some scribbling of Bond that was within a few days of the death. There were a couple little lyrics on there, but there was nothing with a title or that would give you any idea of where his head was at the time. But I kept that, and I often wonder if I should send them back to Bond's mom. There wasn't even enough to build up into something that would stand up to Bond's reputation. Let me read that last line again. There wasn't even enough to build up into something that would stand up to Bond's reputation. To me, that rings true. Even him feeling a little bit of uncertainty about whether or not he maybe should have gave it to his mom. This was someone that actually knew Bon Scott, that worked with him, that collaborated with Bon Scott, and helped him create some of the best music of the 70s. But again, this quote's not important. Malcolm Young's just, well, he's not calling him a liar, but, these other guys, these other people, these ex-managers and ex-groupies and ex-junkies, yeah, they're the ones to listen to. Part of the irony is it was Jesse Fink's book that made me really start thinking this way, because he really sold me on this idea that Bond was in really bad shape at the end. And he did end up dying, unfortunately. That's some proof there. It's tragic proof, but it's proof. Bond died. He overdosed on something. Whether he drank himself to death or mixed it with something stronger, either way, it resulted in Bond dying. And he didn't show up to one of the rehearsal sessions that he was supposed to show up to day prior. And I'm going to break this down in the timeline. But yeah, from various sources, a lot that came from Jesse Fink's book, Bond's not in a good way. And this is a narrative that Fink himself is pushing. Fink is pushing this narrative that Bond is cracking from the pressure of the constant touring, the record making, doing an album a year. And as those earlier Bonfire box set outtakes show, those early versions of Highway to Hell songs, it shows that, Bond didn't always strike gold right away. He didn't always write his best stuff right away. Hell, there's even an earlier outtake of a song, Dirty Eyes, which is an early version of Whole Lot Rosie. And those lyrics are very cliched and nothing special. That was his first shot at it. Obviously, the Young brothers were like, try it again. Do better next time, Bond. And then Bond came back with gold. He came back with genius. That's, some of the best lyrics he ever wrote. And that's the thing, like Highway to Hell. Like, he gave it his first shot, Wasn't that great? Backseat Confidential was no beating around the bush. The lyrics were touched too much, nothing special the first time around. But Mutt Lange and the boys said, hey, let's try it again. Then he knocked it out of the park. So keep in mind, this is an early stage, and we'll get more on that with the timeline. But this kind of works with the portrait Fink is drawing of Bon Scott, and also with Malcolm Young's line, that maybe Bon is not writing his best stuff. After years of pushing himself to keep up with the AC/DC machine, he was tragically coming undone, and perhaps was suffering from creative exhaustion, even maybe writer's block. Could this even be why he wanted to play drums at that session with Angus and Malcolm? Was this why he told many of his friends after the next album he was done with AC/DC? And finally and tragically, is this why he partied so dangerously hard on that fateful February night? He was in a frustrated state and needed to let loose.